Wait, hold up. Yeah, this game. Fun fact, when I was recording random game footage for the intro, Revelations was the one I had the most fun with. I could barely tear myself away from it to render the intro. So when I finally got around to picking up Revelations 2, I thought what fun it might be to make another double review. That meant playing through the first game again to grab footage, but I could live with that. Revelations is a side story set between 4 and 5. But it might as well just be before 5, because 4 seems like the black sheep of the franchise in terms of story, for some inexplicable reason. Anyway, it features long-running Resi protagonist Jill Valentine on a cruise ship trying to uncover bioterror organization Veltro, who have apparently returned years after simply fading away after an event called the Terra Grigia Panic, which saw a bunch of hunters released on this solar-powered city set on the ocean. Anyway, you are forced to investigate the Queen Zenobia, a dead cruise ship teeming with biological experiments gone wrong. And now that we've talked about how this game is like Dead Aim, let me tell you how it's not like Dead Aim. It's good. As the game starts, it's very foreboding. For the first few levels, you only fight 1 or 2 enemies at a time, and their deadliness is very much emphasized. The fact that you can only run forwards, and that you can only evade by quickly turning around or dashing past them, is very much deliberate, and works a lot in the game's favour. But you can also move and shoot, lending at least some mobility to combat. Revelation's biggest asset is its pacing. It starts out as slow and plotting to build tension and emphasize the danger of the situation, but it slowly ramps up to where combat is the core focus. There isn't a sudden switch, it's a natural progression as the obvious caviars come in to deconstruct the survival horror tone. These games usually eventually stop being scary simply because you get used to the circumstances, but Revelations proves they don't have to portray their core mechanics to embrace the way a player moveset naturally evolves. You will get a few more guns and expansions as the game goes on, but this doesn't devalue the danger level of the enemies you face, especially as you fight yet more types of them. Your slow speed consistently emphasizes the proximity of your enemies at pretty much all times, but it doesn't leave you without a fighting chance either. It's a combat system that stands up to scrutiny while giving a fair challenge. Of course, this is on the Zenobia. You also have several chapters with different parties and different loadouts, and even as early as the second chapter they portray a more action-oriented approach. Some keep up the flow of the game while adding some variety, and some only feel like they get in the way. There isn't much pattern to it, even in terms of the story. Speaking of the story, it's a weird situation. There's a lot about it I really enjoy, but some particular lines are so bad they've become bona fide memes.
My only hope is that it has a high-powered CPU. That would be great.
It's like the story and the dialogue were written by completely different people, and they stand in direct contrast to each other. Capcom wrote in yet another comedy duo of lanky wise-ass and stocky bonehead, but they also wrote in a multi-layered tale of genuine intrigue and multiple factions playing off against each other, even to the point where the home team is fucking with Jill and company just so they can avoid an altercation with a mole for a party entirely separate from the one they're directly fighting. It's a little hammy, but every plot thread that is introduced has a payoff and explanation, and God, let me just tell you how refreshing that is to see in a Resident Evil game. It's a thoroughly entertaining, well-designed survival action horror game that rivals the otherwise untouchable Resident Evil 4. Pity the ending hints at, lesser adventures. When I finished the game, I honestly went down to the supermarket and grabbed myself a couple of coffees in preparation for the next game while it installed all of its doodads. It makes just as much sense as any other segue anyway. So if you didn't see the first Resident Evil CG movie, Degeneration I believe, you might be a little out of the loop as to why Claire Redfield is suddenly with this terror save group. Set between 5 and 6, Revelations 2 sees her and Barry's adolescent daughter, Moira, being taken prisoner and dragged to a remote island full of biological experiments gone wrong. And now that we've talked about how this game is like Code Veronica, let me tell you how it's not like Code Veronica. It's not very good. That isn't really fair. Revelations 2 has its good parts. Every level with Claire is generally good. A nice mix of tension, action, mystique, and gusto. It's dynamic on the fly as opposed to building up action over the course of the adventure, but this is fine. It remains generally good throughout, going through each of the Overseer's House of Horrors, fighting off probably the most mobile enemies in the series, with one of the most mobile control schemes in the series. It takes as much speed to run in any one direction now, unless you decide to sprint forward, so you'll be strafing a lot more and trading a lot more fire. It never sucks, but it also seems to lack any particular sense of brilliance. In trying to mix old school tension and puzzle design with new school mobility, it ends up feeling a lot like Dead Space, And when you're fighting the Dead Space series, Dead Space 2 will have you beat any day of the week. Claire's levels in Revelations 2 are generally good, but they're sometimes wonky, the 4th chapter barely counts, and there is ultimately little to write home about. Aside from some above average cooperative and character switching elements that can even allude to later puzzle elements, nothing really stands out. Of course, somewhat evoking a popular contemporary survival horror series is better than just attempting to be a popular contemporary survival action game, because that's about all you'll get from Barry's levels. When Moira sends a distress signal, Barry manages to track down the island 6 months later, and he and this little girl Natalia have to investigate. And surprise, it turns out Wesker had a sister all along who had been behind the experiments on the island in search of ultimate power. I thought the reception from 6 was clear. Stop retconning other Wesker family members into existence. The best way to describe Barry's levels is to imagine a bunch of level designers sitting around thinking of ideas circa June 14th, 2013, when a little known indie game called The Last of Us is released to some acclaim. The level designers then say amongst themselves, oh, we can do that, but replace the enemies with ones 1,000 times more inept. There's a lot of skulking around some decrepit and dark environments, having to use a clunky inventory system to combine items, and although you have to switch to your partner to use it, you can even see enemies through the environment when you're sneaking around. It feels like it's trying so desperately to be The Last of Us that it really doesn't even compare. The enemies being bad in this section of the campaign is easily the worst factor. In The Last of Us, you're either fighting humans with pretty decent AI, or monstrosities with special factors you have to account for. In Claire's side of the game, the enemies pretty much all employ rushdown tactics, but they don't give you any room to breathe. Here, you have basically 2 enemies to fight. These flat out zombies who dodder around until you shoot them in the head once or twice, and pose absolutely no challenge whatsoever, or these freakazoids who have a weak spot whose location is completely random, so you just have to shoot all of the body parts until it appears. Neither are in any way fun to fight. You could take full advantage of Natalia's abilities to stealth kill some of them, but why use that ingenuity when it's just easier to shoot them and be done with it? It's also worth noting that 3/4 of Barry's campaign retreads through levels that Claire has already gone through by this point, so you're basically playing a far worse version of the level you just played each time you pick to play as Barry. And even though some sequences in both sets of levels drag on, and I think I had more footage for this than Revelations 1, it feels shorter than its predecessor. So there you go, even though it's the longer game, it feels more unfulfilling. It's also a pity the ending hints at, lesser adventures. Revelations 2 is at best a decent extension of this particular third-person survival horror model, and is at worst a hollow attempt to capture the glory of other games entirely. I can only recommend it to those who have already played through Dead Space 2, The Last of Us, and Revelations 1. Its only saving grace is raid mode, which is better than ever, but also takes you through levels found in Resident Evil 6, which might give you Vietnam flashbacks if you hated it. I didn't, but let me put it like this to all the people who defend that game by saying it has good mechanics. Good mechanics cannot always save a game from bad design, and while Resident Evil 6 isn't a game I'm likely to review, there is another which I have very, very similar feelings about, which I will definitely be talking about.